Okay, when did Socrates live? He lived in the 400s BC. He took part in some of the wars in the Peloponnesian Peninsula between Athens and Sparta. He talks about one battle that he was in, or I think around 450 BC or so. Maybe a little later, maybe 440 BC. And how he saved someone on the battlefield and so on and so forth. But the Greek citizens had to fight like we supposedly used to have to fight. We don't, now we just pay people to fight for us now. But like the Civil War, you could fight your way out of the Civil War by paying someone to take your place. At the moment we're paying people to do the fighting, but it looks like we may have to go back in to do it ourselves at some point pretty soon. But in Greece, you had to fight as a citizen. You were expected to bear your military responsibility. And Plato did, which Socrates did, which he felt quite honorable about, and always spoke about that. Then he developed a school of thinking. He was kind of like a gadfly in Athens. And he was executed openly around 404 BC. At the point that Athens was in a state of collapse, they blamed all their misery and collapse on people like Plato, people like Socrates. They thought that he had undermined the fabric of their society and sapped the will of their young people to, be courageous and fight and stuff like that. But I don't think that is true at all. They were basically making excuses for themselves, but they had become totally corrupt by this time. And if anyone was representing the strength of the society, people like Socrates were. So he was executed as kind of like a scapegoat. Like I like to tell my classes that if there was no Socrates, you wouldn't have the story of Jesus. Socrates is a pre-Jesus character. He's just not presented as a supernatural being, but it is the story of the just man done to death by an unjust society, and everybody in the Western world knew it. Socrates how does he die? He's forced to do what? Hemlock, drink hemlock. Yeah. Thank you. And he does it willingly, does it just like Jesus in the Gospel. He's quite happy to meet his fate. He thinks it's important that he face up to that. If that's what the society wants to do to him, he's quite willing to accept that because he's a member of the society and so on. He's not going to run away, and he's not going to avoid, let their punishment fall upon them in the end. He's just going to do what they voted that he should do. So there's some dialogues about that. Who wrote the dialogue? Plato. So who's Plato? He's one of Socrates' students. And he put all his own ideas, and presumably some of Socrates, in these series of dialogues that he wrote. So he wrote about the master, and he used Socrates the way the New Testament uses Jesus, as a kind of master teacher. And so this literature is pretty familiar to people at that time, but not in ours. We're used to, reading Rolling Stone or something. We don't have a literature anymore that's widespread in our society. Except in the schools, when people go to school, they occasionally read. They always seem to read Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter. That seems to be inflicted on everybody. So I don't understand what's any good about that book, why they should inflict it on. But they still don't understand. They don't have anything else to inflict upon people, so they inflict that on them. It's a totally, as far as I can see, useless book. Hemingway's a little better. Some people get a little bit of Hemingway and stuff, but so what should they read? Well, that's a good question. I think I would start with Plato and Socrates, actually, and develop a curriculum that would be useful to students, not some of the stuff that seems to be. Yeah.
In those dialogues that Plato made, whose ideas tend to always come to the top?
Oh, Socrates or Plato, depending on who you think, if there's the same or different. Plato says we're both the same. Plato's ideas always win. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a spin there, right? Well, so the point is that he wrote these things in the form of a dialogue, and they have conversations about interesting philosophical issues. That's the beginning of Western philosophy. And it's always a different kind of subject. That, like you say, or who always wins? Well, Socrates always wins. But you see, it's the basis today. We call what they were doing dialectic. I don't know why it's called that, but that's what it's called. This argument back and forth. And it's the basis today of what people do in legal training. People in legal training go to law schools and basically read Socrates and Plato. You know, they learn how to argue a subject through question and answer in a courtroom situation. And what lawyers are doing in courtrooms is really what Socrates and Plato are presented as doing in these trials. So you see, this is not something that you should not look at. In fact, I used to read Socrates in this class, but I couldn't find an excuse for it. Instead of the Carlos Castaneda junk. But yeah, I found that students actually could relate more to the Carlos Castaneda stuff than the Socrates stuff. I was going to call it American civil religion, which I think is basically the intellectuals' religion, which I think it is in a way.